Welcome to the MEND, a podcast to learn about services and support for victims and survivors of crime, sponsored through the Center of Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I am Anna Nassett, host of this bi-monthly podcast and show, and today I'm delighted to have my friend Shaun Johnson here to talk about sane nursing programs. Welcome, Shaun.
Hello, and thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. The show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concepts for victims and survivors of crime. We want to acknowledge our healing process and provide resources not only in our state of Vermont, but throughout the country that could benefit victims of crime as they begin to mend. I do always want to begin with a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss topics of healing, but with that in mind, we may occasionally hear a story related to crime, discuss our mental health, or have other sensitive subject matter. We urge you to be careful and listen at your own discretion. So as I said, it's my privilege to introduce Shaun Johnson, a sexual assault nurse examiner from the University of New England in Portland, Maine. Shaun has been a nurse for 6 years and is currently working as regional coordinator for the University of New England Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program. In his role, Shaun is known for promoting evidence-based practices while still considering the individual's needs of his patients and the growing number of forensic nurses in Maine. He's always willing to go above and beyond to ensure that his patients receive the best possible care. And in his free time, Shaun loves to DJ and is an avid photographer. Welcome, Shaun.
Thank, thank you again.
Yes, Shaun and I got to meet earlier this year through working together when I got to go out to Maine, and I'm just delighted to have you on here to talk about this really important work.
And I am as well too, because the state of forensic nursing, is something that we definitely need to talk about more as a resource, because unfortunately, a lot of people just don't know that we have this role to help them. So thank you again for having me on.
Absolutely. So as we kind of kick off, and we'll start talking more about the work you do, but could you give us a short overview, and only if you're comfortable, of how you were called into nursing and then specifically into sane nursing?
I was called into the medical field because I was a medical assistant for 7 years prior to getting my nursing. And prior to that, I actually was in banking. So the medical field is a second career for me. What brought me into nursing was I just loved caring for patients. I loved just providing them that care just to get them on a road of healing. What brought me into forensics was a happy accident, because in nursing school, forensic nursing and care for a sexual assault patient, it's not talked about within nursing school. So in nursing school, I never knew that this was a field of nursing. It wasn't until I started working inside of the ER that I saw a flyer for a 40-hour training course. So I talked to my managers and I was like, I am interested in this, which did prompt a lot of questions, because there are not many men that do work within this field. And I took the 40-hour course and I found my passion for the patients that I want to provide care for. And I haven't looked back since, which is really nice.
Amazing, and thank you. And we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the gender discrepancies within
Yeah.
this field as we move on. Like being called to this work, you also are out there educating now too, because you are
Mhm.
the regional coordinator for the SANE program at University of New England. So can you educate us a little bit about what a forensic nurse is and what type of work you're doing on a state level, a couple states over from our little state of Vermont, but similar work is being done here as well. So just kind of share with us about what a forensic nurse is and what type of work you're doing in the educational field.
Yeah. So forensic nurses are our training, and our role within the hospital setting is to care for any patient that has been a victim of any sort of sexual violence. So that's a couple of different things. Sexual assault is definitely one of those. Human trafficking and domestic violence. So anything that that encompasses those three things is really what our training is for. A lot of our training is specifically for the for the sexual assault patient, but the outreach of that training is very vast. Um, so that's kind of what we do. We do collect any sort of evidence on patients, but what we do for the patient is very patient led. So the workup that we do, patient has the complete choice of what they would like done. And we will make that happen for them right as best as we possibly can. Um, that's kind of a brief overview on forensic nursing there. Within the actual state, part of what my role is to go into hospitals and do like trainings on stuff that forensic nurses see, to try to educate staff within those hospitals how to care for a patient that has gone through some sort of sexualized trauma within their life. Because a lot of clinicians, as well as nurses and techs and so on, they don't understand that everyone that they interact with has gone through trauma at some point within their life, and just trying to bring that to them, like this is how you care for a trauma victim. Because in health care, when we hear trauma victim, our first thoughts are, is it a car accident? Is it someone fell off of a ladder from like 3-4 stories high? But don't they we a lot of healthcare professionals don't understand trauma is much more than just the physical. It is also the emotional there too. So just trying to educate healthcare systems within Maine, like it's much more than what you think it is. Here's some added training for it. And those trainings also do act as re as recruitment tools for nurses to join our 40-hour training to slowly bring them right into the forensic field.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a really good overview. And one of the things I really like that you said was that when working with a patient, it's really patient led. Have you read the book Know My Name by Chanel Miller?
I have not yet. It
That's
is on my list of books.
It's a really good book, and she kind of describes that process of being in the hospital with the forensic nurses. And for listeners who are kind of wanting to see what that looks like, it's a really beautifully sad, very sad done description of that process. But I think, what is so important is that patient-led focus, and that in a time when a patient feels like all their power and control has been stripped away, that they're able to make choice and have voice within this incredibly trying and difficult experience of being in the hospital, I think is so important. And
Agreed.
yeah, and to do those things of looking outside of like just the physical trauma. If someone comes in, yes, like from a car crash, we can see the trauma that's happened to them. But if someone comes in from domestic violence or sexual violence, there's a whole nother load of trauma that comes along with that. And that it's so important, yeah, for clinicians to be able to be educated on that. And thank you for being a part of that.
Thank you.
So within this work, how have you seen kind of, like, we've talked about who forensic nurses serves, but are there different types of forensic nurses? And also, how has your SANE program in Maine grown over the years? And just kind of show us a little bit of how this has grown in a short amount of time, relatively, within the state, and that's mirrored here in our state as well.
A lot of the a lot of ed, the education for forensic nurses is all based on sexual assault. However, a lot of us have now started to reach out and do all of the extra training to really help better serve our the 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 trafficking patients as well as the DV patient, because a lot of what our training for a sexual assault patient, it definitely transfers over to that type of violence too. So the primary role was the beginning of it was just for the 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 sexual assault patient. But over time, we've all realized we need to also provide the same level of care to these other patients here too. So a lot of us within the state, as well as other states that I have talked to, the forensic nurses just, I mean, they take care of anyone that is a victim of rid of interpersonal violence. Any of that gender-based violence, that is what we will provide trauma in informed care for. And so that's how the role started versus to where it's kind of leading to now. A lot of programs are branching out, and now some in some states they do have their own standalone centers outside of hospitals for for anyone that has been affected by that type of violence, just to provide much better care. Um, Within Maine, we're now starting to offer a lot of extra trainings to bring all of the forensic nurses in every part of Maine up to a higher standard of care, not just for the sexual assault patient, but for every single patient that they come in contact with, because most of the forensic nurses within Maine also have a dual role inside of the ER. So they're also a ER nurse as well as a forensic nurse. So it's just training them, like it doesn't matter if you're taking care of someone who is coming in with belly pain or someone who is stating that they are a trafficking victim. Provide the same level of care and trauma in informed care there, because we don't know what that full history of what every single patient that we see has gone through.
Absolutely. And I think, just sharing, the growth that you all had in Maine, it really mirrors the gender-based violence movement in a way. In the 70s, we were calling it the battered women movement. And, we're coming a long way to realize how everything intersects, that, within the forensic nursing, that the domestic violence intersects with sexual assault, intersects with stalking, intersects with trafficking, and learning how to approach that in a more comprehensive way is so important. And, I know that we can all be like, we want to see everything change now, but to look at how much has been done in a relatively short amount of time within this field is really powerful.
Agree
And
completely.
that we're going to keep learning and growing together. And, as I say, it's the ripple. Like, we're the little pebble and then it ripples out, and we might not get to see all the ripples. We won't, but we still keep being that pebble to create that ripple effect.
Exactly, because I know that some of the stuff that I'm doing within Maine and helping some other states with, I know I'm never going to see what the end result of that is going to actually be. And I know that, but I also know groundwork is being laid for the future here. And that's something that, I mean, with the movement here, with we see stuff back in the 70s that's now the key focal point now that they brought up right back then, which is it just shows progress is being made. It may be slow, unfortunately, but progress is being made.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, One question I would have for you that I didn't send to you, but I think is a good question, kind of, that because Maine does mirror Vermont in a lot of ways. So you have very, very rural populations, a couple of bigger cities. Um, how is your forensic nursing in these very rural areas as compared to a little bit bigger areas?
I wish I would say it's equal all throughout the state. Unfortunately, it's not the actual case. And I know that Maine, with other states that also kind of are like both both of ours, do kind of mirror us as well. Our more urban centers do have a very large number of forensic nurses. Unfortunately, when it comes to more of the rural and county areas, there may be one in one hospital, and there's three hospitals surrounding them that don't have one. It's still it's still something that we are trying to at least change, because unfortunately within Maine there are still six hospitals that don't have a forensic nurse right on staff, or has even gone through any sort of training for it. So it is something that we are working on, and now where some of the restrictions that COVID put on a lot of us are starting to ease. Hopefully by middle of next year, we may get that number from six down to three. Hope, and that's what our goal is.
Yep, absolutely. So if you're listening from Maine, we need three. Um, so one of the things we kind of talked about early on, or you mentioned kind of as we started off, was being a cisgender male in
Mhm.
this field and how that has impacted your work. Can you just kind of share with me how you've handled those hurdles or criticisms or judgments and how you've continued in this work within those?
Yeah. I'll talk about some of the hurdles here first. Some of the hurdles were from within the hospital that I used to work at, because a lot of the patients that came in are females, or part of the LGBTQ plus group, and so a lot of concerns were, would they even let me examine them, offer my services right as a forensic nurse to them. There was also concerns about the legal side of it, right, as well too, because they were concerned about that as well too. However, when it comes down to it, the patients that I have taken care of, they never saw me as a cisgender male. They never saw me as anyone else besides a nurse providing fantastic care to them and taking care of what their needs were. Out of all of the patients that I've offered my services to, I've only been asked not to do it once out of the 60 plus that I have done. But that was also, there were some other situations with that, and I did not take any sort of offense for it. And I was like, no, I understand. Let me, and it was no issue on my part there. With some of the hurdles, to overcome those hurdles, I did have to really rely on some of the data that is out there, saying that yes, males are also victims as well too of DV, of sexual assault, anything that falls within that umbrella there. And I always had to press with them. We give our patients choice of their nurse, but why aren't we doing it in these type of situations right as well? And so a lot of their views really started to actually change. And once I started to actually practice within the hospital, I had no hurdles or challenges. I had a very supportive team and management that really like fostered growth. So it it actually wasn't overly bad. I know that is not the actual case for every male that is entering this field, because I do know that there's a lot harsher environments where they may not be able to actually take this training, which is sad. and I hope that changes soon. Um, when it comes to criticism, I have not had a whole lot with our SART teams within Maine. I have a great relationship with them, and we help each other grow and so on. So criticism really has not been anything that I have faced th- throughout this journey here.
That's awesome to hear. Thank you for sharing about that. I think, I think back on kind of my own experiences of, not necessarily needing a sexual assault nurse, but just being in the hospital, that it really is like the right person comes to you when you need it most.
Mhm.
And I know my mother and I have talked about that of, watching my father pass, that there was like the right nurse that was there the night that I was up all night with him. And there was the right nurse that was there with my mom. And we just kind of have thought about that over the years of just like, it's the right person at the right time. And yeah, you don't necessarily see their gender in that moment at all. And just getting to know you as an individual, I can see how you would really, really excel in this field.
Thank you.
So what would you say to encourage people thinking about entering the forensic nursing field, for whatever state they're in right now that are listening to this?
I always say reach out to someone who is doing it right now, because if they're even considering it, they have a lot of questions. And unfortunately, someone who doesn't work within this field can't answer those questions, just because they just don't know kind of what we see and kind of what our day to day is. So I would reach out and talk to someone who is in the actual field. And there are so many of us right on Instagram that talk about what we do, and we don't shy away from it. Even reach out to some of us that do it, because we'll talk to anyone. That's one thing about forensic nurses. We don't shy away about talking about it or what we see. And sometimes it's very hard to hear, but it's the truth. It is what we do for work.
Yes, well, I would, second that as I've, moved deeper and deeper into this field of you get a few of us at dinner together, and I always feel bad for like the passerby who's like, what are these people talking about? My God.
Exactly. I mean, some of us we don't, and we're quite loud. Nurses are loud in general. Yes, we've had some weird looks with some of the ones in Maine that we've gone out to eat, and we talk about speculums, and we've gotten some weird looks. So,
Yes, but it's also, I think a part of that is, and that's something I talk about in some of the trainings I give, is about like normalizing these conversations.
yes.
Part of us growing this movement, part of us seeing change is around normalizing these conversations, because it's so important that we're not just all tucked away. And it's so important for the victim or survivor who may overhear you to be like,
Mhm,
oh, there are people that care. So I think
mhm.
normalizing this is such a big part. And yeah, echo what you said as well of like, if you're interested in this field, reach out to somebody in your state, or we'll give some resources at the very end.
Yeah.
But yeah. So as we start to wind down today, what would you like to say from your professional capacity to victims and survivors who may be listening today, who may have gone through that experience of having a forensic exam or opted not to?
You are believed. That is the first thing I want to echo. Most importantly, you are believed. Um, and also it's your story. It's yours to share if you want to, and also yours to not to share if you don't want to. Don't feel pressure by anyone outside of the medical field or by anyone to share your story. Um, and that care is out there for when you're ready for it, even if that's a week after or 3 years after. Care is available at every hospital.
Thank you. Yes. And I love whenever we start with by believing. It's so
Yes,
important, is we
yes.
always have to start by believing. So is there anything else that you would like to kind of cover today that we haven't fully addressed?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Um, Thank you so much for your voice and your passion and your time today. It is such a pleasure to know you and a pleasure to have gotten to work with you. Is there any other like positive message, just like a little sentence or something you'd like to share at the end to just our general listeners, whether they are a victim survivor or just listening for more information?
I would have to say to the general nurse that is out there, or really within anyone within health care, and it doesn't matter what your role is, always start by believing first. And you have to learn trauma informed care. And it does not matter what your role inside of the hospital is, because it will help benefit you professionally as well as personally. So that would probably have to be my closing statement to here.
Yes, and I would tap into that understanding the intersection of violence.
Yes.
The different layers of how these things appear. And I think that's, one of the things that we did work together was you had me come out and speak about stalking to the SANE nurses. And at first I was like, I don't understand why you want me to do this, which was, kind of an odd thing to admit. But then realizing that like we just have to keep learning and educating because all of these things tie in together and very well could save someone's life. So
Yeah.
Thank you for continuing to promote that on a state level and nationally as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that does it for us this week, friends. Thank you so much, Shaun, for joining us.
Thank you again for having me. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. Absolutely. To learn more about forensic nursing, you can go to forensicnurses.org. So it's FORENSICNURSES.org. If you have any ideas or questions about the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me at standupresources.com. I'm your host, Anna Nassett, and I look forward to being with you every other week here on The MEND. Be well, be strong, and goodbye. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or feedback. We love hearing new topic ideas from listeners and watchers as well. Thank you for listening to The MEND, and be well.